What do crew members do in between contracts? My contracts were 6 months on the ship and then 6 weeks off the ship. I like to think that 6 month contracts is kind of your baseline, your average, right? With Norwegian, the spa Steiner, so the spa employees they didn't work for Norwegian, they worked for Steiner, which is the spa company. They worked 9 months, and I believe they had 9 weeks off. So they did 9 months on, 9 weeks off. And then you kind of have anywhere in between. I think that there's a law now that is the most you could ever be on a cruise ship in one contract is 11 months. It might be 10, it might be down to 9. But there is a limit, you know. You're not gonna be on there for 18 months straight. But just kind of depending on your position and your department and the company, I guess. I know some of the photography team had 7 month contracts, if I'm not mistaken. So it's all up to the company and your position and your department, things like this. And so knowing this, you kind of have to figure out, before you get on the ship, you got to figure out what are you going to do after the contract's over, right? For me, knowing that I was going to be working 6 months on the ship, 6 weeks off, and then assuming I was going to go back for another contract, another 6 months. So in a full year, right, I was only off the ship back in the U.S. for 6 weeks. So when I was first starting cruise life, I was like, well, should I keep my apartment? You know, should I keep it and try and sublet it? You know, have somebody else live there and my name still be on it? What am I going to do? And I ultimately decided just to move out of my apartment. You know, fortunately, I could move my furniture and all my stuff to my parents' house and put it in their basement, and which they didn't charge me, obviously. So I didn't have to pay bills, you know, for a place I was living in back on land, but I wasn't there, right? Paying rent on a place I'm not staying. But also, you know, let's say I did have an apartment and I was trying to sublet it. If I'm on a cruise ship halfway around the world, how am I supposed to make sure that the person who lives there pays me every month, right? Or pays their bills, because it's still my name on the lease, right? So I just thought it'd be easier for everything for me just to not have anything, my name on any lease, you know, or anything like that. And plus, being away just makes it a better state of mind to know that I don't have other stuff to worry about, that I have no control over thousands of miles away, right? But with that said, that also means I don't have anywhere to live when I'm not on the cruise ship. So I also, after my first contract was done, moved into my parents' house, right? And I think I was either 25 or 26 at the time, which is not a big deal. I mean, one thing I learned working on cruise ships, meeting people from other countries, different cultures have different ideals, different ways they view family, living with your parents, stuff like this. And one thing I learned is that it's a very American way of thinking, in that when you're 18, 19, 20 years old, you live on your own. You move away from your parents' house. Many countries, many people I knew and met from other places, they lived at home regardless. Even if they were working on land, they would still be living at home. Some countries, some cultures, don't move out of your parents' house until you're married. Coming from the United States, that sounds crazy to me. I want to have my own privacy. I want to have my own domain. I want to be on my own. I want to experience life as a true adult, figuring out life on my own, right? having my own apartment so I can do whatever I want to do. I don't have anyone looking over my shoulder. I don't have to sneak into my room and not wake up my parents, Like the way we see it in the US is you live at home when you're a kid and then you move away when you're an adult, right? So the idea of living with my parents when I was in my 20s was not something I ever thought I would want to be doing. There's nothing wrong with it. Some people do it. Country by country, it's a very common thing to do in other countries. I'm not trying to rag on it. But for me, that's not what I was doing. I was living away from home for 4 or 5 years. Or after I turned 18, I went to college, right? So I lived away from home for those 4 years. And then for another 4 or 5 years when I was working before the cruise ships, I was living in other states, living on my own or with friends, So I had been on my own for 8 years or so. So after my first contract, I didn't have anywhere to live. So my plan was to move back and live with my parents, but it's only 6 weeks. So, you're not even really living there. It's almost just like you're hanging out there. Think about the cruise ships. Think about the in-between contracts. And it's funny how, like, the terminology we use, because we're working on a cruise ship. A cruise ship is a vacation destination, right? So as I'm working my 6-month contract, everyone on board is on vacation. After my 6 months of working, I go home and I'm on vacation. And so when crew members talk about going on vacation, they're not talking about getting on a cruise ship and going as a passenger. They're talking about going home, right? So our vacation is kind of a staycation. Now, with that said, after my very first contract with Norwegian, my friend and I, who happened to be signing off on the same day, we decided our ship is going to be in Europe when we sign off. Norwegian at the time was doing a program where you could defer your flight, right? So Norwegian paid for us to fly home. And what we said to them was, hey, can you push my flight 2 weeks? So instead of flying off on July 1st, we said, can we fly home on July 14th, right? They said, sure. You just have to come back to the same airport, right? And then I think if it was more expensive, maybe we would have to pay the difference, comparatively or whatever. But at the time it was fine. So they said, okay, your flight is, instead of the 1st when your sign-off date is, it's going to be 2 weeks later. And what we did is we stayed in Europe for 2 weeks and we actually traveled, So we finished our 6-month contracts and then we traveled Europe. We went to 5 different countries for 2 weeks. We took trains, we took planes, we stayed in hostels. And then as long as we made it back to the same airport that we would have had to go to on that sign-off day 2 weeks earlier, our flight was there waiting for us. No charge, right? And I flew back to North Carolina at that point. I don't know if the company they kind of stopped doing that program after my first contract because Norwegian was they were buying some other companies. They were going through some mergers and stuff. So I think they just wanted to stop doing that. And I don't know if any other companies actually do that. It was an awesome, awesome program. One thing that I tell people, what are they going to do when they're not on the ship, is exactly that. Travel. You could, if you have 6 weeks off, you don't have to go home for 6 weeks. You could travel, If you have a visa in the U.S., man, you could stay in the U.S. for 6 weeks. Come back to the ship. You need to speak with human resources, make sure it's all copacetic, make sure you can come back to the same place, whatever, for your sign-on date if you're not coming from home, but you can travel. You know what I mean? A lot of people do that. After my 3rd contract, I took a vacation to to Canada, and I was there for 2 weeks, or maybe 1 week. But I traveled some of the U.S. as well in between. So ultimately, I didn't end up going back to ships, but I would have done the same thing. Had I taken that 4th contract, I would have done my vacation in Vancouver, and then I would have flown back home and then gotten back on the ship anyway. So traveling is a big thing. Like I said earlier, different positions have different amounts of time that your contracts and amounts of time for your vacations. I know that like the cruise directors for Norwegian were working about 3-month long contracts, and then they were off for about 3 months. So it was like half and half. The captain, for instance, and maybe the hotel director and also maybe the staff captain, kind of the higher up positions, they were working about 3 months on, 3 months off. Now they also got paid more per month, right? So if they're not working for 3 months, they have the money they made from the 3 months they were on the ship, kind of balancing that out, right? If you find yourself in a place where you're not working, like let's say you're a musician, right? Or an entertainer of some kind. Entertainers don't have, for the most part, these set in stone contracts. Some of the, like the production cast will. They'll have 4-month long contracts. Production musicians will have kind of contracts. But like lounge musicians, they might have a 2-month, they might have a 3-month, they might have a 6-month contract. They might have a fill-in contract. That could be 1 cruise. That could be 3 cruises. Be 6 weeks, right? So once you start looking at different contract lengths, you start thinking about, what am I going to do? If you're a musician and you live at home and you are called to work for 1 week on a cruise ship, I would just say keep your apartment and you're just away for a week and making some money. That's just like a gig, right? If you have a 6-month contract, then it gets a little iffy, right? Especially when you're, as an American, coming from like living in apartments, you have leases, you want to break leases. Depending on where you're living, it can get kind of tricky. So let's say you're on for a month, and then let's say you're a seasonal youth counselor, and you work for 6 weeks, but then you don't know when your next contract is. You can just have another job on land. If you work 3 months and are off 3 months, I mean, you can get a job on land for 3 months. That's not a big deal. Plus you can, make some extra money, and then you go back on the ship later. You know what I mean? You have all this extra time. You know what I mean? You have all this free time in between contracts. Well, sometimes you only have 6 weeks or 1 month. But if you have several months, you don't have to travel. You can stay home. You can save money. You can get another job. Stuff like this, right? Musicians, you keep gigging on land, and then you wait for the next contract. You go back on the ship for a couple months. You gig on the ship, back and forth, blah, 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 blah. You're still working, right? So vacation is... The word vacation that we use as crew members is mainly just saying when you're in between your 2 contracts, right? But there were times when 6 weeks didn't feel like enough. And there were other times where 6 weeks, you're ready to get back on the ship. I felt that 6 weeks was a nice middle road for vacation, where it's just long enough to where you're starting to be like, I want to get back on the ship. I kind of miss it. I want to start making money, 6 weeks. But it's also not so long that you're like sick of being at home, or you feel like you're not doing anything with your life and you're wasting all your time. 6 weeks is a nice amount. The reason we do the in between the vacations like this, you can think about it this way. You work every day on the cruise ship because you live there, right? So even if you have a day off, you're still on the ship. You can't leave, but for the most part, most positions you work every single day, 7 days a week. A normal job on land, you have a couple days off for the weekend, right? So what the vacation has done is given you like, let's say all of the Saturdays and Sundays that you would have gotten off if you worked a normal job on land, they've just grouped them together into consecutive days in between contracts, right? So just think about 6 weeks as having like, I don't know, 30 weekends in a row, right? So, and when you're done with that contract, especially like a 9-month contract, like working in the spa, ooh boy, you're ready for that vacation. And you get home and you sleep for like, I don't know, 4 days straight. But then you're ready to have a vacation. You travel and you hang out, and there's some issues though with these vacations, right? One thing that happened to me was I moved back to my parents' house, and I was 25, 26, right? And not only did I have not a lot of friends back home at my parents' city, but of the people that I could still see, they had like these normal jobs back home, right? They work during the week. And so I have 7 days off in a row. what are you guys doing? You want to hang out? I'm like, well, we're at work, Sean. What do you think we're trying to do? And I was like, so it got kind of hard to, that's where kind of it gets a little boring, because if a lot of your friends are working normal kind of jobs or working in general, because I'm not working for those 6 weeks, but everyone I know is working. And so that just takes away time. I can see friends trying to catch up with what I missed back home. And so it's not as awesome as 6 weeks off, great. If you find stuff to do, it's pretty okay. But a lot of times I found myself kind of bored, and then just kind of ready to go back to the ship. Not that I was so needing to work 7 days a week, but it was hard, living with my parents, kind of feeling like I was too old to be there, and not feeling like I was on my own anymore, you know what I mean? And then on top of that, like all my friends, when I was trying to see them, were working or busy, because they have their lives too, right? So my favorite thing was to travel, to see different places. Plus, you work for 6 months, you save up all your money, and then you can go on a sweet 2-week vacation, not worry about money, and just have the time of your life. That's kind of what my buddy and I did in Europe, man. We didn't think about money at all. We just had a great time. I mean, we planned ahead though. We booked our hostels, and we booked plane tickets and some of the train tickets ahead of time, because we planned out our itinerary and how long we were going to be in certain places, because by doing it a couple months in advance, we saved some money on plane tickets and stuff like that. But for the most part, once we were there, once we were in London, once we were in Dublin, once we were in Amsterdam, we could do whatever we wanted. Money wasn't an issue, and it was such a great time, and especially knowing after those 2 weeks of vacation, I'd still go back home and I could chill for another 4 weeks before I had to go to work again. That was such a great end to the first contract. You know what I mean? Such a great experience. So I think it's great having all that time in between, because the long contracts really do get at you, and working every day really does start to ache. You know what I mean? And so having several days off in a row is very, very nice. But then again, it's good and it's bad. You can, if you have 3 months off in between contracts and you're not doing anything, man, you I don't know, you might drive yourself crazy, right? But if you maintain the solid vacation and you find things to do, and especially maybe a couple weeks before you go back on the ship, you make your rounds again, you say goodbye to your friends, you plan this stuff out again, then, sometimes the vacations go by like that. So, enjoy your contract, take advantage of your vacation, travel, sleep, and re-energize for your next contract.